In the last episode, we started working on our PHP script for the register form. But before we continue on right now, we need to do some error handlers to see if the user has made mistakes. Because a username can only be created once, and we don't want to have two usernames in our database. So therefore, we want to give an error message whenever the username already exists. I will be including the most basic error handlers that I could think of. There are so many error handlers that you actually could do, but I looked around on a couple of websites and just took the basic ones. And if you remember, in our database, we said that our columns cannot be empty. So let me show that to you. So let's go to localhost /PHP MyAdmin. That went wrong. Let's click on PHP tutorials, table users, and let's click on structure. And you can see that the values of ID, username, and password cannot be null. So let's go back to our register form. And the first check that I want to do is to check if all the fields are filled in. So right below our variables, let's create an if statement. And the condition is a function called empty, because we want to check if a variable is empty or not. And it would return true if a variable is empty and false if it's not empty. So what we first want to check is variable username. And we actually could create 3 if statements, but right here I want to use a logical operator. So right after our first function, so in between the closing parentheses, let's write down 2 vertical bars, and let's copy our function, paste it after the vertical bars, and change the variable to password. And let's do the same thing for our confirm password. And be careful when you're copy pasting stuff, because you can make easily mistakes with parentheses or semicolons, because we are creating a function which has parentheses inside our if statement that also has parentheses. And I'm just saying this because it's, well, even for me, a very common mistake to make a typo with parentheses or semicolons. So be aware that if you're getting one, the problem is with parentheses or semicolon, and the code is not the problem. So if a field is empty, we want to redirect the user to the same form with an error message. So inside our if statement, let's use a function that we already have used before called header, and set the location, well, in double quotes, location, colon, to punctuation mark / register.php. And if you don't know what the punctuation mark / means, this is basically going back one directory, because right now we're in our includes folder, but our register.php is right inside of our project folder. So we're taking a step back from includes and we're going to project. And after register.php, let's add a question mark and say that error is equal to empty fields. We also want to send back some information because, well, some programmers do not care that the user has to re-enter all his fields again. But from a user experience perspective, you don't want the user to fill in all the fields again. And especially when you're dealing with a website that is generating money for you. So I recommend you to do this, because otherwise the user has to fill in all his fields again, and chances are that it will probably go to another website. And the way you do this is by setting the name of the input field equal to the variable. So after empty fields, let's write down an ampersand and say that username is equal, and let's concatenate the variable username. And, well, because the password is sensitive information, we don't want to send back the password in the URL. So right now, let's test it out. But before we do that, we need to include this page inside our header.php. So let's do that. Let's go to our header.php. And let's copy paste our require ones from the database and change database to register-inc. So let's save it. Well, let's save all the pages. So let's fill in a username, and let's say Dari. Let's add a password of 12345, and let's not add a confirm password. And let's make the screen bigger. Now let's click on register. And you can see that we're getting an error message in the URL because we have an empty field and the username is equal to Dari. And that's what we want. But if we go back, we need to add something else inside our if statement. We want to add a new function below our header function called exit. Because we basically want to jump out of the code because we don't want anything after the if statement to be executed. So let's create an else if statement. And it really doesn't matter if you have a space between else if. PHP will understand that, well, with or without space, you're dealing with an else if statement. So the condition of the else if statement will be a new function called preg_match. But we want to add an exclamation mark right in front of it because we want to see if it is false. And what preg match basically does is it searches in a string for a pattern and it will return true if it exists and false if it isn't. And preg match takes two params. The first one is the search pattern and the second one is where you want to search in. So let's say first and second. And the search pattern that I'm using for a username is a very common one that you can find everywhere on the internet. So inside our first set of double quotes, we need to write down a /, a caret, so an arrow up, and a set of brackets. And inside the brackets, we want to say what we want to allow. And we want to allow letters A-Z, so A until Z. And we also want to allow them in uppercase. And we want to allow the numbers 0 through 9. So let's go outside of our brackets, write down a star and a /. And the second param is what we actually want to check. So what we want to check, well, we don't need double quotes. We want to check for username because we don't want to have any weird signs inside of our username. And whenever a user has an invalid username, we want to do, well, basically the same as in the if statement, so the header and exit function. But instead of saying you have empty fields, we want to say invalid username. And we want to send back the username. So let's go outside of our else if and let's create a new one. And what we want to do right here is to check if the password do not match the confirm password. So let's write down variable password and let's say exclamation mark equal to confirm pass. So if we just say equal, we want to see if they are equal. But we want to give an error message only if they are not equal. So let's go back and let's copy the same message from above. So the header and exit. Let me make my screen a little bit bigger. Now let's change the error message, so invalid username, to password do not match. So passwords, I made a mistake. Passwords do not match. And we actually want to send back the username because the username is valid. And the last check that we want to do is to see if a username already exists inside of our database. So let's create an else statement. And inside the else statement, we need to create a connection to the database to see if a username already exists. So let's create variable SQL. Let's set it equal to double quotes. And the rest of the code will be done in the next episode, where I want to use a database to see if the results of a user matches database information. And the way I will be doing this is using prepared statements. So thank you for watching this episode, and I will be seeing you in the next one.